Hey, this is Shell, and you are here at Next Millen with Shell. And I have a new guest today here. His name is Sam Litvin, and we worked together a long time ago. He's very brilliant, and working in silicon photonics, you just don't hire anybody. You have to hire the best of the best. So he is the best of the best. But we're going to talk about sustainability today. And then we're going to do a part two with Sam because he has a biology degree. And we're going to talk about why vaccines work. And of course, this is talking about the pandemic and with COVID, but that's going to be on part two. He also spent some time in Israel and he wrote a book. It's available on Amazon. It is called Our Story, Our Support. Did I say that right?
Your story, our support. Yeah.
Our Story, Our Support.
Your story.
Discovering our common threads. And so it has a lot of photography and stories in it. And he took a journey back in 2012 and went to 30 countries. And then he did a passion authorship, and now his book is available. So go check it out. I'll put a link down below. So everybody, welcome Sam Litvin.
Thanks, Shell. It's good to see you after all these years.
Yeah. Not too many years. I'm only 12. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, tell me what's going on as far as sustainability. We, of course, have a large consumable product problem and plastics problem, and our population is just growing fast. And how are we going to keep up with cleaning up Mother Earth?
So I'll kind of talk about how I got into sustainability because I was a engineer. That was my first education, optical electronics, optics and photonics. And then in 2012, I went for a trip working on my book, traveling to 50 countries, discovering these Jewish stories, Jewish diaspora, kind of the first globalized population, because Jews had to move around and adapt to different places as they were in diaspora, right? They were exiled from Rome and they had to adapt to different places, but they still kept their culture. And so when I came back to the United States, I got another engineering job, but I actually started a startup soon after publishing my book that worked on journalism. I saw this issue with journalists. They were not able to basically keep their job. They were not able to be paid because journalism was basically being destroyed by Facebook and Google. Half of all news organizations were basically out of business. And journalists, love them or hate them, they're the reason why we know everything, right? There are some journalists that are in Egypt who are taking pictures and they're giving us context for the information, right? We can't just take pictures of what's going on in Egypt. We also need to understand why. So they're the people who are talking to the politicians and they give us context for what's really going on. They're not perfect, but that's what we have. And when we lose half of the journalists, we basically, and the world is becoming more complex, we're losing half of the eyes on the world. And it means that we don't know about corruption. We don't know about a lot of bad things that are happening around us. And that means we don't catch problems early to solve them, and they can get out of hand. So I was working on a startup and it wasn't going anywhere. So I went to Israel and I started to work on an environmental science degree there and an MBA. And I decided to combine these two degrees because I felt like as important as journalism is to us, a much bigger problem is coming towards us, right? Climate change is hitting civilization at 100 miles per hour, and it's increasing every day. And it's an existential, we don't think about it because small changes are happening every day. But in essence, if we hit over 3 degrees Celsius, which is about 6 or 7 degrees Fahrenheit, we have a runaway problem, and basically the Earth becomes uninhabitable. We have Mars, and I want to stop that. There's still time. So I was studying environmental science, and I was studying business, and I thought I would combine these two together to help businesses find a way to be more profitable, but at the same time be sustainable, right? So kind of move the curve. And as a result, I kind of had new ideas in the past year or so working at a lab at SDSU on looking on carbon, measuring carbon, understanding carbon sequestration. And I had some, as I was applying for a PhD, I had some totally different views on the fact that we're not looking at fixing the problem. We're looking at fixing the symptoms.
That's
So
what
that's
the
basically kind of where I
American
am now.
Medical Association does with their bodies. You know, why would they take a different approach? I mean, it just seems like that's the theory, you know, behind every approach. I would like to see more solutions, not just like, oh, it's
I mean, you
leaking,
want
you
to
know, let's put a
prevent
Band-Aid on it.
diseases, but it's more difficult.
Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah, it's
so
go
what
ahead.
do you think is like the biggest impact right now on the climate warming up? You know, you were talking about it going up maybe 6-7 degrees Fahrenheit. What are the main factors heating us up?
So there are a few, right? And I think that's kind of what happened in 1970s when at UCSD, UC San Diego, the healing curve was discovered. Basically, two, right, is rising rapidly. And they correlated this to the rising temperatures. And they could not find any other changes in our environment, right? Sun wasn't getting any hotter. We weren't getting any closer to the sun. Nothing else could explain these rising temperatures except for these rising CO2, which we knew were rising with the emissions from cars. So we kind of saw this one-to-one correlation. And so scientists kind of jumped up and said, let's stop oil. And of course, oil companies want to make profit. I mean, everyone does, right? We all work for a living. We're all trying to make a profit for ourselves. And naturally, they resisted. And they used their, bless you,
Excuse
and they
me.
used their political clout and their finances in a predictable way to protect themselves. But that's not the only thing that produces CO2. CO2 basically gets trapped in the atmosphere, and when rays of sun hit those molecules, they get energetic, and so they warm up the air, right? So, and you can think of it kind of as the earth is the body, right? And when it warms up, it's kind of like getting a fever. A little bit of fever is okay, right? But too much, you need to go to the hospital, right? And so we're getting to that point where the earth is getting heated up. But the other things that are there are methane, right? So our society feels that eating meat is good, even though it's unnecessary, right? It tastes good, it feels good to eat it, but to produce meat, you need a lot of water to create the hay. You need a lot of land, right? So you need to chop down a lot of trees, and you end up having to have a lot of cows. And the cows burp and they produce methane. And methane is much more heat trapping than CO2, right? And then there's the food that we eat. We go out to restaurants, right? We have a lot of leftovers. We throw it in the city dump, but it doesn't just sit there. It actually, microbes start to eat on it. And those microbes also create methane, right? So as this methane comes up, right, so that creates increase in temperatures. And then there's things like old refrigerators, old air conditioners. All of those things use freon, right? And that also is another gas that heats up the atmosphere. So we're not just attacked by the cars, right? The fact that our cities are now made for driving, right? Instead of being close together where you can use public transport, but they're bigger, right? We've chopped down a lot of trees, we've created parking lots. All of that is reflecting air, right? And then, but we also have the issue with our diets, right? So we've chopped down a lot of trees to create space for cows, and they're producing methane, right? And then on top of it is refrigerators, AC, etc. So all of those things are combining to create the problem that with every year, right, the CO2, the methane, all of those gases are increasing, and they're increasing the temperature and bring us closer and closer to actually extinction, our entire human race.
What do you
Within,
think about impossible meat, man-made meat? Is that going to have an impact?
I eat it. Um,
What do you
to
think of
be
it? I
honest,
haven't tried it.
I once I realized, I mean, the difference. What do cows do, right? They eat grass, right? It gets
Or
produced,
corn
or
if they're in
whatever
a
they're fed,
worse.
right? But it basically they take plants, right, and they convert them into protein. That's all meat is, right? It's the animal converts plant into protein. And there's no reason why, if you like the taste of meat, if we can do that in a lab, if we can convert the same plant, right, in a petri dish into
Mm.
protein, then the only difference between the impossible meat that you eat, right, and the meat that's the animal is that one was much more intensive in terms of using water, right? One was much more
One
intensive
was
in terms of
living.
producing methane, and you're now killing a living thing, right?
Yeah.
They're conscious. They can feel pain, right? They feel love for when they have a calf or something like that. All you're
It's
doing is
very
is now, in a
brutal
sense,
when
being sadistic, right?
the people on the PETA side, when they go in there with their hidden cameras. Oh, they really expose the brutality of that industry. Mm.
Right. It's a life of suffering so we can eat, but that's the beautiful thing is if you can convert plant matter into protein, that what's the point of killing something? So, I mean, to be personally, I eat meat a few times a year. I do enjoy it, but at home, I like to call it a flexitarian. So I eat when I go out. I might have some meat, some fish, but at home, I haven't eaten in over 10 years just because I realized that it was much healthier for cardiovascular for a lot of reasons. I mean, a lot of crazy diseases are caused by meat, like Lou Gehrig's disease, like a lot of crazy, weird neurodegenerative diseases. Actually, your chances of going up from meat. So um, I felt like I wasn't missing out much because I got to eat. If I went to someone's barbecue, I would eat, but I dropped down. So in America, we eat like 100 kilograms, or it's like 200 pounds of meat every year on average. In India, they eat 4, right? So I'm down to like, I don't know, 10, 15 uh, kilograms of meat a year. So that way, I think, if United States, if a lot of meat eating countries, America, by the way, is number one by far.
Mm.
So we have the most people driving, we have the most people buying things, we have the most people eating meat. So we have to take responsibility over our impact on the world, right? So we as Americans, and when I say we as Americans, right, we consume a lot, but the people who are at the top, right, who make the most, who benefit the most, who own these corporations, I don't want to point fingers because we all rely on them. Our mutual funds, everything relies on these corporations. But we do have to take responsibility that we as Americans benefit the most from all these foods, but we're also causing, if this mass extinction happened, it means 300 million people were responsible for the death of 10 billion, right?
You think we're up to 10 billion? Last I heard, we were
By
about
the
seven
time that
and
it
a half
happens,
billion.
right? By the time, so I mean, it will be a curve, but if we are right now, so right now we're 7 or
You
8
think in
billion.
40 years maybe we'll die
Um,
extinct?
yeah, I mean,
40?
that's the way it's looking, right? So if we don't take drastic
Looks
steps,
grim.
yeah, I mean, it's the way that I look at it, and what lights the fire under my butt is that I will be alive to see my kids and grandkids, right? dying agonizing deaths. It's not just
Mhm.
us, right? But I've had a great life. I've traveled a lot. I've enjoyed. I've gone to Coachella. I've worked. But you know, now I'm just really warming up. Is the way I'm just getting going. So what's going to happen to my kids when they reach their 30s and they're starting to having kids, right? They're
Mhm.
going through extinction.
And my
How
grandma
crappy
lived
is
to be
that?
107. Can you imagine if you lived to be 107? You haven't even made it. I haven't even made it halfway to her life, And I think the world isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable to have these people that are centenarians. I almost think the EPA, the FDA, and the AMA are all kind of in cahoots to kind of poison us off so we don't live that long. Like my grandma owned some
Let's
original stock, and they were just like, they were trying to buy it back from her, and she kept saying no. And they were just like, please, lady, die so we could get our original stock back. I think the government too, with Social Security, they're like, geez, lady, when are you gonna die? You're 107 in 3 months.
well,
Okay, finally she's off our rolls.
so few people live to that age that it doesn't make a difference. And I mean, you have to think back of why EPA and FDA were created. Every regulatory agency in America was created in blood because so many people were dying. So we
They
had,
let so much through the cracks. I think they
of
they let
course,
a
they're
little
not
poison
perfect,
in.
but if we did not have them, we had so many people dying of
It
poisonings
would be
before
worse.
FDA.
Yeah.
It was so whenever we loosen up on regulations, we have people dying, and that's the difference between a civilized and developed country is regulators, and
Mhm.
uncivilized. If you look at any country without regulations and you look at their morbidity and survival, there are no 100 centenarians, right? They're all dead by 30 or 40. If
Mhm.
you like a country without any regulations, Somalia, Iraq, it's the worse, right? The country
Yeah.
is, the less regulators and the more capitalist, free market capitalist it is, because there the corporations have the free run. No one's regulating them. And so
Mhm.
regulation, what are regulators? It's just a bunch of people who are usually middle class, educated, who are paid to look over the corporations to make sure that they don't take advantage of us. So the government, there are bad governments and there are sometimes bad people in the government, but that's the point of government. Sometimes it's, they something wrong. They're getting voted out of office, and bad things are going to happen to them if bad things happen. So unlike, a lot of people like to talk about putting money into charities. Well, charities, like there's one in San Diego right now that they were ripping off the government and donors to millions of dollars because there's no oversight, and you can't fire them, right? Because people have no jurisdiction over them, so that CEO can stay in power and keep on doing those things. So the regulators, our taxes, we're paying for a way to have somebody look over the people who have the most pull, who have the most ability to harm us, to help us, right? It's Apple, Qualcomm, Intel. They're making great products, right? But it's almost like the money that they make is a responsibility too, right?
Mhm.
They can be wealthy, but there's also responsibility that comes with that product. We
Well,
can't just
Nestle is one of
be
the
thankful for them.
ruiners. They're ruining our lakes and our streams. Nestle, they make
Yeah.
Coca-Cola, they make Dasani water, and they're one of the biggest offenders of our natural land in America.
Not just America. I'm not sure about Coca-Cola, but yeah, they produce a lot of bottled water, and there is a lawsuit right now, I think, in Northern California because they use up all of the water and there's none going to the farmers. But much more than that, they've been poisoning in places, and
That's
really,
been
I
going
mean,
on for years.
there's a great movie on Netflix called Rotten, where they actually look into a Nestle holdings as far as water and as far as chocolate, because it's a dirty business, and it's not necessary to do business in a dirty way. You don't
But they
have to
do.
do this, and I think that's the other thing with United States that I've noticed is, and we were talking about that, is I was writing my letter, what is it, statement of purpose to get into grad school, to work on environmental, to get a PhD and kind of elevate my abilities to work on this issue. And I was thinking, like, what am I doing? We already
I
have
just
the
want to
tools.
save the bees. No,
Bees need to be saved. I mean, if we have no
they
bees, we have no
do.
food.
They're at the epicenter of
Yeah, I
these
mean,
issues.
everything is connected. You can't take out a small piece, like people talk about. Oh, what about this small fish in this river? Well, you save the fish, you save the river. No river, no agriculture.
I think I was watching it on Rotten. They were talking about the seafood industry, where if you take out some of the sharks, then the sharks don't eat the mid-sized fish, and then the small fish get bigger, the mid-sized fish get bigger, and the quality of the fish goes down, and some of the lagoons get
They eat up all of the plants, and then once you have no plants, basically that collapses the entire fish stock. So yeah, once I know that episode you're talking about. They reintroduce some sharks in like Seychelles or somewhere in the Pacific, and as soon as they come back, the reefs come back, right? Because you have that now ability you have to have a balance. And the same thing where they reintroduce the wolves in Yellowstone, right? As soon as they started to attack some of the deer, right, then you started to have plants and trees coming back. And once you had trees and plants coming back, they could hold the water better and the banks of the rivers and completely change the landscape. So we have to, we're quick to look for a quick cause for one thing to do, but we have to understand the whole big picture of the thing.
Yeah. And trees talk to each other.
They do.
Have you seen some of those documentaries talking about how they talk to each other? It's amazing.
Yeah, and not just trees, but mushrooms as well.
Mushrooms are one of the biggest of all. Like their underground system is incredible, just miles and miles and miles. But like there was a documentary I watched on trees, and a new species of animal came into the territory, and the tree had developed little spikes. So where there were little leaves, they were by spikes. And so the deer couldn't get to those little tiny green leaves because the spikes were protecting it. And these trees basically did a comms line, like a communication line to like all the other trees in the area, grow these spikes out to protect your little leaves. And they adapted, and they sent a telegram essentially to each other. The trees talk.
You
it's
put somebody
pretty wild.
Yeah.
So,
that's the thing about adaptation in biology, is everything adapts constantly, right? Those who attack, develop, and those who defend constantly develop things. And the problem that we have right now is humans have become, anytime you have something long living, is not supposed to procreate a lot. Large animals that live a long life, right? So that's kind of our adaptation to being able to live, is that we don't produce a lot of offspring. But with our ability, with our medicine, by having a lot more people survive, back in the day they used to die off a lot more. We've propagated far too much, and the entire ecosystem cannot handle this many humans, especially considering that we don't just eat now, right? We now need this huge house and this laptop, all this stuff, and we need 3
and
cars,
lots of toilet paper,
right?
apparently.
Right. But that's what I was going to kind of say, is that why the realization that I had is that we have a issue of overconsumption. And if you actually look at it, America consumes much more than other countries. We consume twice, like we produce twice the CO2 of Europe, but we have half the population, right? And we like to attack China a lot, but China's producing products for us. It's our corporations out there, right, that produce products for us, which means all those factories, you have to power all those factories. Well, they're powered for our benefit. I mean, they get some benefit as well, but you can't just disregard the fact that all those goods are produced for our markets by our corporations. And so all those people are working there and producing all that stuff for us. So that CO2 it's not like we just have produced 15% of the world CO2, right? We can't ignore the CO2 that's produced by China for us. And the same thing by China for European Union, etc. So we have to look at those things too, and then think about the causes of that. Because if we have a need, right, to buy lots of stuff, to travel, to drive very far, and we don't address that need, why we have such a need, and is it necessary, we're not going to solve things. Because if we find some technology to, let's say, absorb CO2, we're going to have the moral hazard. So the moral hazard is where you start to do a lot of bad because you do a lot of good. So like, let's say you donated to an orphanage today, and therefore it's okay to steal from your company tomorrow, right? And usually the problem with the moral hazard is you end up, by doing a little bit of good, you end up doing a lot more bad because it justifies it in the brain. And so, like, for instance, we have this moral hazard happening with plastics. In 1970s, the plastic lobby said, you know what, we're going to recycle. And everyone started feeling good about recycling. Well, what ended up happening is that people felt good about recycling, so they started to buy a lot more plastic. And companies, the oil industry, because you create plastic out of oil, they ballooned, right? So these days we have massive amount of plastics floating in the ocean, in our landfills. Why? Because we all feel good that, oh, hey, I'm recycling, but you're actually using up a lot more plastic than you ever would have. And I think if we don't address the core issues of why we're consuming so much, then we're not going to actually, once we start to in some way absorb the CO2, we're only going to produce more CO2 because we're not going to feel so bad about producing it. So we're going to drive more, and we're going to buy more crap. And as the population grows, right, this problem will only exacerbate. And that's what happens when you only chase the symptoms, right? If you just want to reduce the CO2 without looking at the reason why we're producing it, and is it necessary to produce it, then you're not going to reduce the overall consumption, right? You're only your consumption is only going to grow because those causes, the underlying causes of why you're producing it, will still stay there, even if you address the symptom.
Well, there is that author, I can't remember her name, but she's making a lot of money off of her book, and she's on YouTube a lot. She's Asian, and she talks about living a minimalistic life and cleaning the clutter. And
Marie Kondo.
And if we all lived like that, more of a minimalistic life, I think we would be reducing our consumers. We'd all have these reusable, containers to fill water. I, of course, filter my water and reuse some of my bottles because I stopped buying those cases of 24. Once I use clearly filtered. It's kind of like Brita, but it's way better, and it filters out the fluoride and the chlorine. And I just put it back into reusable BPA-free containers. So I'll even sneak them into restaurants because I don't know what kind of tap water they're giving me for water. I don't want to drink it that has chlorine in it. But okay, so let's wrap this one up so we can start part 2 on the vaccine and why it works and why there are some people having some reactions to it. So just to wrap this part up, How where do you see the most important things that we need to do to correct the course we're on right now as far as heating up our planet and cluttering it all up?
So, like I said, we need to look at we need to look in at ourselves because we are part of the society, right? We're all Americans. And so we're all contributing to this. We're all consuming, we're all driving, and we're all eating meat. And we have to look at why we do what we do. And my personal theory on this is that we're all immigrants to this country. We've all suffered some kind of trauma coming here, whether we left the country and abandoned that country, abandoned generations later, or if we were refugees and we all feel like we don't quite belong because we're all so different. We don't know what our culture is. And this creates disconnection between all of us. And so in US, we have a lot of addiction, and addiction is caused by trauma. Trauma causes you to dissociate from whatever causes you hurt. And so in US, I don't know of any other country where poor people spend money on storage because they have so much crap, right? I don't know of any other country where a woman goes through a breakup and she needs to go shopping, or a man needs to go shopping. I know guys who buy things on Amazon and don't even open the package. They just like to feel that novelty, right? That dopamine hit. We have people buying new cars to impress each other, right? You feel bad about, and every 5 years, and you have to show a bigger house, right? We do all these things. And my personal thinking is it's like we all need freaking therapy because we don't need this crap. Like I was working in Luxteria and I would travel all the time. I didn't buy a new TV. I had roommates. I was living as little as I could just so I could see the world. But really, I don't need most of the things I have. In Europe, they buy a weed whacker that's going to be stainless steel and it's going to be amazing and it's going to work for them so long that they're going to pass it on to their kids, right? And they're going to spend $500 on it, but it will work there. Whereas we buy one for $15 and it's broken, after 3 tries, so we buy another one, right? So the cheap pay twice, right? The impatient wait twice, right? So America has this tendency of trying to avoid the hard step, right? We want to find the cheap solution, the easy solution, and there's no easy fix. So I think we have to find a hole that's in each one of us, right? Like you said, you could never live near another person, but in Europe, they're fine living together. They're fine seeing their family all the time. In America, the one we have, I've never heard of this, where you hate getting together with your family for Thanksgiving because you're going to argue. This doesn't exist in other countries. Like in Israel, so traveling and living abroad gave me a huge perspective because in Israel, people talk to their parents all the time, like 2 or 3 times a day. They go see them once a week. It was like, it was normal. And I realized, like, wait, in Europe, it's the same. And here we try to, we'll have these big houses to have kids their own room. And then we want them to have their own cars because we want to drive them. And so what happens is we're so isolated from each other that the epidemic in the United States is suicide. We're so afraid to ask for help. We're so afraid to connect to other people. And my personal thinking is it stems from that trauma of coming from faraway places and not knowing how we fit together. So we have to really create this identity of seeing each other as Americans, like not this African American thing. Like I had a neighbor and he said to me, "I've never been to Africa. Why are you calling me African?" Right? So I think we have to we do have differences between each other, right? And people have different cultural and celebrate those things, but still treat each other as Americans. Like it's crazy that we like, hey, I don't want people to have a minimum wage of 15. Those are Americans who are living below the poverty line. Like have some empathy for each other, right? And connect to each other. And I think if we do that, right, that we don't need any technological innovation, right? To find a way to live in smaller places, live closer together, produce less waste, eat less meat, right? Eat within the confines And that only happens from personal happiness, right? When you don't need to impress other people by buying a new car, when you don't need to prove to the next rich guy that you made $5 more million, right? All of those empty things of status and unhappiness is what I think drives, and this is what sets America so different apart from other nations, where people are more at ease, being closer together, happier, right? And if we can do that, I think that will address the cause. If we can address the cause, we can worry less about the symptoms. That's my thoughts.
Okay, let's attack those causes and figure out the ones that are bad and eliminate them, squash them.
Survive and
The
thrive.
lobbyists are going to probably try to keep them alive, but let's do what we can.
We have to lobby too, play the game.
We know what's right. And
gotta lobby too.
All you people that are just after greed and money, you know what's wrong. Wrong is wrong. So
work on yourself.
Look in the mirror and try to change things, okay? Don't destroy Mother Earth. And we'll be back with another episode with Sam Litvin. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.